I'm Teisha with Shalom TV's news update for Thursday, February the 6th, 2014. A rocket was fired at Israel today, setting off sirens in the Ashkelon region. The rocket was launched from Gaza this afternoon and fell in an open area. No damage or injury was reported. The World Jewish Daily reports that U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry hit back at some critics of his peace efforts in the Middle East. Kerry told CNN, "I've been, quote, attacked before by people using real bullets, not words," in a reference to his service in Vietnam. And he said, "I am not going to be intimidated." Kerry explained that there are those who don't support the two-state solution and other policies between Israel and the Palestinians, but what was important was to look at the positive, and that the majority of Israelis and Palestinians believe in peace and want peace. Kerry was referring to recent criticism made by some in the Israeli government over statements he made in Munich this past weekend, where he noted increasing boycotts of Israel could worsen if peace talks do not succeed, interpreted by some as a warning to Israel. Kerry said to CNN, "I did not do anything except cite what other people are talking about as a problem, but I also have always opposed boycotts." Kerry also reiterated that the U.S. and the Obama administration are, quote, absolutely committed, ironclad, to the security of Israel. The Times of Israel reports that Kerry also said in the CNN interview that is set to be aired in its entirety tonight that he has, quote, no plans whatsoever to run for the presidency in 2016, and that he intends to retire from politics following his term, saying, "I'm out of politics, I have no plans whatsoever, this is my last stop." And Knesset member Moti Yogev retracted his earlier accusations against the U.S. Secretary of State that Kerry's peace efforts possibly bear an undertone of anti-Semitism. As we reported to you earlier this week, several Jewish groups had condemned Yogev's statements that he made to Israel Radio last week, where he said that Kerry's, quote, obsessive pressure on peace talks may have anti-Semitic undertones. One of the groups that condemned Yogev's remarks was the Anti-Defamation League, who said yesterday that Yogev shared with them a copy of a letter that he wrote to U.S. Ambassador Dan Shapiro earlier this week, in which he retracts his charge of anti-Semitism against Kerry, but still maintains his opposition to the Secretary of State as a, quote, fair mediator. ADL National Director Abe Foxman said that they accepted Yogev's retraction, adding that Israeli-Palestinian negotiations have led to great political tensions in Israel, which are likely to last for some time, and we continue to urge all involved in this important public debate to express their views civilly and respectfully. Chairman of the Knesset Law, Constitution, and Justice Committee, David Rotem, apologized today after strong criticism over remarks he was reported to have made that Reform Jews are, quote, not Jewish and are, quote, another religion. In a Facebook post today, Rotem claimed that those remarks were misconstrued. He wrote, "Comments attributed to me regarding the Reform movement have been misinterpreted by elements within the media. I have never said belonging to the Reform movement makes anyone less Jewish." Rotem further explained that being an Orthodox Jew, he has theological differences with the Reform movement's perspective, but that he respects all Jews and apologizes for any misunderstanding and offense that he may have caused, and said he hoped his clarification would bring about the vital debate on how to unify the Jewish people around the shared values rather than divide the Jewish people over their differences. Rotem was reported to have made the anti-reform movement remarks during a constitution meeting on Israel's child adoption law this past Tuesday. Following the report, many in the Jewish community had called for his apology. Among them, Anti-Defamation League National Director Abe Foxman, who said the suggestion that Jews throughout the world who identify with the Reform movement are somehow not a part of the Jewish people is an unacceptable characterization of a proud, highly engaged, and committed group of Jews, adding that such rhetoric fosters divisiveness and feelings of alienation. And leaders of the conservative movement, including Rabbis Julie Schoenfeld and Stephen Wernick of the Rabbinical Assembly and United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, respectively, also criticized Rotem. They issued a statement saying, quote, "The Jewishness of the Reform movement is beyond question and in no need of defense," and urged the Israeli government to keep Rotem from roles in which his behavior is, quote, harmful to the state of Israel and Jewish unity around the world. The leaders said while the conservative Masorti movement around the world is vigilant every day to protect and advocate for our beloved state of Israel, we can only express lamentation for the utter lack of leadership that makes these outrages so frequent and undermines the very aspirations that are the foundations of Judaism and the Jewish state. And Union for Reform Judaism President Rabbi Rick Jacobs also responded to Rotem's reported statements, saying that they were unacceptable and calling for Rotem's removal. Jacobs said there is no way that someone who holds these views and has consistently stated them in public can be a fair arbiter over laws that impact the very essence of Klal Yisrael. Rotem said he spoke with the executive director of the Reform movement in Israel, Gilad Kariv, this week and set up a meeting with Reform leaders next week to further clarify the matter. Demonstrations took place today in several Israeli cities following the arrest of an ultra-Orthodox draft dodger. 12 Haredi or ultra-Orthodox protesters were arrested in Jerusalem for blocking traffic at the entrance to the city, and demonstrations also took place in Bnei Brak and Ashdod, where there were additional arrests. The protests followed the arrest by Israeli military police of a yeshiva student earlier this week who had dodged the IDF draft. He received a 5-day prison sentence. The demonstrations also follow a court ruling this week to withhold funds from yeshivas whose students did not appear for enlistment in the IDF and who have had their service deferred. The New York State Assembly will no longer consider a bill that bars funding of colleges and universities who support academic boycotts against Israel, and the American Jewish Committee thinks that's a good thing. AJC's Director of Contemporary Jewish Life, Stephen Boehm, said that while academic boycotts against Israel were a gross violation of academic freedom, this bill was not the solution. Boehm said the proposed legislative action, which itself raised academic freedom questions, is not the answer to discriminatory acts against Israeli academics, such as boycotts. As we reported to you last week, the proposed New York State bill would have cut funding to any institution in New York State that participates in programs of the American Studies Association or other anti-Israeli boycott movement activities. The ASA had called for an academic boycott of Israel late last year, which was condemned by more than 200 university presidents across the country. The AJC reiterated its appreciation for the American Association of University Professors and the many New York colleges and universities that have consistently condemned threats to academic freedom, including boycott resolutions and legislative proposals. The New York State Senate had adopted the proposed anti-boycott legislation, but the measure's sponsors in the Assembly decided to withdraw it. It will now reportedly be modified and reintroduced. Canadian Parliament member and staunch Israel supporter Irwin Cotler says he will not be running again. Cotler said yesterday that next year will be his last in Parliament, whose next elections are in October of 2015. Cotler said he looked forward to completing his mandate then and continuing the pursuit of justice in other arenas. Cotler, who was also a former president of the Canadian Jewish Congress, was first elected in the Montreal district of Mount Royal in 1999 and said he considered serving in Parliament one of the highest forms of public service.
So we've been discussing the Iranian.
And turning to our Shalom TV programming for tonight, Thursday, February the 6th, New Jewish Cinema is coming up at 7:30, featuring Eve Annenberg, director of Romeo and Juliet in Yiddish. And then at 8 o'clock, William Patterson University psychology professor Neil Kressel speaks at Fordham University about Muslim anti-Semitism. And then at 9, Qasim Hafiz talks to Mark Golub on L'chaim about how his traditional Muslim education taught him to hate Jews and the journey which brought him to Israel and why he now considers himself a Muslim Zionist. That's tonight here on Shalom TV and ShalomTV.com. And that's Shalom TV's news update for Thursday, February the 6th, 2014. I'm Teisha Bader.